Dad Barker's Ghost by R.C. Canterbury. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Matt Braymiller. Dad Barker's Ghost by R.C. Canterbury. While I ain't got no serious objection to anybody's particular brand of religion, began Sonoraville, the same being peculiarly their own affair, like their particular brand of liquor or tobacco, I sure maintains it is my firm conviction and belief that the fakes and false prophets hooked up with several of the current and popular brands who are going up and down the country seeking what they may devour along about dinner time are some numerous, and ought to be suppressed a whole lot for the good of the order. Which same is not said in a spirit of carping criticism, as I may say, me being ready to extend the right hand of fellowship to any hombre, whether he be Methodist, Protestant, or suffragist. The only thing I inquires about being said hombre's honesty and his peculiar belief, which same I reserves likewise for myself. Which the case I has in mind calling forth these few remarks is that of this two-legged he-person over in Cerdo who calls himself a spiritualist or clairvoyant or something like that. I confesses here and now that my attendance at churches has been some few and far between, and likewise my sabe of the finer points of the game some vague and nebulous, as I may say. But when it comes to bringing up spirits of the departed, I sure professes to qualify as an expert. This locoed galoot who's at present extracting pesos from the pockets of the proletariat of Cerdo is not the first of the breed it's been my happy fortune to bump up against, and I may say with truth the first application sure took good and plenty. I wouldn't believe in a ghost if he carried his own burial certificate round with him and brought 3 more spooks along as witnesses, and even at that I ain't saying but what there may be honest spooks, but the only ones I ever see sure were liars, and the truth was not in 'em. I never does figure it out in my own mind who starts it, whether it were Bob Hawkins or Sam Kinney or Sile Cooper, or maybe it was old Dad Barker begins it when he croaks. But anyway, she starts, and she sure assumes some large proportions muy pronto, which she happens like this. Me and Bob Hawkins finishes cutting hay on Colonel Borden's place down the valley and drifts over to town to lay up for a spell. I reckon we puts away about 1,000,000 bales of hay that season, and she's sure some job. But I maintains the hardest of it is having to live for 3 or 4 months with Bob Hawkins. I can't just name offhand any single hombre as I'd enjoy hearing the sound of his voice exclusive for that length of time. But if I was to make up a list of the humans that I'd sure hate to be thrown in company with for that long, Bob Hawkins' name would head the list. Somehow I gather that Bob kinda thinks the same about me for some reason. Well, we tells each other everything we knows and a thunderin' lot we don't in the first few days, and then we starts argufying, and derned if I ever see such a argufying cuss as Bob. We argufies about everything we can think of, beginning with the price of hay and the Mexican situation and finally winding up on ghosts. I always maintains and always will that there ain't no such animal, that she always turns out to be a white cow or a rock or a union suit somebody has forgot to take off the line. But Bob, he tries to down me by quoting from Shakespeare and the Bible and Ayer's Almanac and such like authorities in a loud tone of voice. I never see such a cantankerous cuss as that Bob Hawkins in my life. We don't seem to be able to settle that argument no way. Most times when we runs out of argument and gets tired of abusing each other, we just goes round and won't talk for a day or two until something else comes up to argufy about. But this time she's plumb serious. So when we drifts into Cerdo, we argufies all the way, and after we has a drink or so, we sets down at a table in the Palace Bar and keeps her up. You know how it is when you get to argufying where there's a crowd. Every darn fool there has to put his lip in, whether he knows anything about it or not. I hasn't called Bob a liar and proved it more'n twice till there's 8 or 10 other yaps taking sides and offering to bet they're right. I reckon old Sile Cooper is the worst. When that old gin head sets in a game, he sure perjures himself some scandalous. He swears that he's not only seen ghosts, but has held converse with them. And old Jim Tate, I kinda 'spects Jim to stick to me, but to hear that old fool run on about spirit rapping and table tilting was sinful. Of course, I has Sam Kinney and a few more on my side, but shucks, we can't talk near loud enough to win no argument. Argument is a lot like love. Whichever way she turns out, she leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and they're alike in lots of other ways too. But at the same time, she's a plumb human trait. You get a lot of fool he-men together and let 'em start one of these here long-winded red-hot arguments with everybody taking sides, and she most always winds up one of two ways. They either gets plumb peeved and hostile at one another, or they starts to bettin', which is what happens to this little debate. Bob Hawkins, figuring to make a grandstand play before the crowd, suddenly fishes out a roll of good paper money and slams her down on the table. "There's 100 perfectly good pesos," he says, "which I've sure perspired some strenuous to collect, and that dinero says there's plenty of evidence of ghosts," which I plays her straight as she lays and pauses for some of you galoots to cover the bet. Now, I've always maintained that backing your opinion with your bankroll is plumb poor argument, but at the same time it's sure human. So I reaches for my own bundle and slams her down. "Bob Hawkins," says I, "me and you has fit bled and argufied for some several weeks in that hay pasture, and I've tried in my poor weak way to show you the error of your ways and point out to you your various shortcomin's. But if nothing but separating you from your filthy coin will convince you that you're locoed and a dad-blamed idjit besides, your Uncle Pete will sure proceed to the separating. Son, your bet's covered, and with your kind and indulgent permission, we places the dinero in the keeping of our esteemed fellow townsman Doc Stringer to hold till same is decided, so trot out your ghost." Bob, he don't make no kick on the Doc holding the money, but just kinda grins nasty-like and says, "Wait and see." The Doc, being the official stakeholder of the community, gets some dignified and sort of pompous like he always does, and writes each of us a receipt on a prescription blank. "In accepting the position of arbiter in this momentous case," he says, "I naturally inquires how the same is to be settled. As I understand her, our esteemed fellow citizen, Mr. Bob Hawkins, is to produce evidence of the existence of disembodied spirits, which, I take it, has to be done in sufficient manner to convince the party of the other part, our likewise esteemed fellow citizen, Mr. Pete Suggs, otherwise known as Sonora Pete. This being the manner in which I diagnoses the case, I inquires from Mr. Bob Hawkins as to how he intends to produce said evidence. It being my only desire," says Bob, "to prove that truth is mighty and will prevail, and to convince this old wall-eyed coyote that I'm right as usual, I submits that if I produces before the citizenship of Cerdo, and this old reprobate in particular, the human ghost of some deceased party within reasonable time, I wins the bet. Does that satisfy you?" he says to me. "She do," I says. "Only me not believin' in 'em none in the first place, I protests against your ringin' in strange and unknown phantoms, and holds out for the ghost of some late lamented that we're acquainted with, which same I maintains is only fair and intended to exclude impostors." "I even agree to them terms," says Bob. "Name your deceased hombre." Somebody suggests old Tristaboricon, the greaser that tried to steal powder from the Picaro Company's powder house while smoking a cigarette, but seeing that they only found a finger or two and part of his sombrero, Bob protests that it's putting too great a job on Providence to collect the material for a ghost, and besides, some of the crowd objects that a greaser, not having a soul know-how, wouldn't be apt to have a ghost. Sile Cooper then mentions Bill Lemon's first, or maybe it was his second wife. Anyway, it was the one which dies, but Bill raises such a row about it that Sile don't insist none. Derned if it warn't funny, considering the number of corpses that's happened in and around Cerdo in the past few years, how few of 'em anybody wanted back. Which we finally fixes on old Dad Barker, him that shuffles off this mortal coil when him and Sam Kinney was placer mining up in Corvo Canyon. Nobody has anything much against old Dad, though I don't think he does me just right about that flea-bit sorrel I trades him for the year Bryant runs for president. "I accepts the corpse," says Bob, "and I guarantees to produce the spook within 2 weeks from tonight. As I take it, the only thing necessary is to produce the spirit of Dad Barker, the manner of doing which being our own affair exclusive. I don't mind stating, however, that I'm aiming to import a party from El Paso for the purpose, which raising spooks is his regular occupation. Me and Sam Kinney ain't particular strong for an outside party, but we don't suspect nothing's wrong with the deal till the next day, when Sam tells me that Bob borrows an old photograph of him and Dad Barker, which was took by that Lunger picture guy about a year ago. Which I don't impugn his motives none whatever, says Sam, me not being prone to ascribe dishonorable intentions to nobody. But what for he wants a chromo of me and Dad, the same not doing me justice and failing to bring out my best points, I sure can't see. She does look some suspicious for a fact. If this party from El Paso is so plumb familiar with spooks that he's on speaking terms with them, what's he want with a picture? We finally figures it out that maybe he needs to identify Dad by after he cuts him out of the herd. But I remarks that if he tries to pick Dad out by the picture, he's sure got a job on, because that picture's the only time anybody ever sees Dad dressed up and his jaw's not working on his cud. You know how these photograph sharps make a feller stand or set when they unlimbers the camera on them, with a two-pronged pitchfork clamped on his dome to hold him straight, and him trying to look pleasant so darned hard he's straining his face. Well, in this picture, old Dad is standing up straight and dignified, not humped over as usual, and sure looks imposing and proud. He's got all shaved up nice and clean, top lip and all, which shows it was some barber job and not Dad's usual homemade scrape. He's got one hand on Sam's shoulder, kind of protectin' like, Sam squatting in a chair with his hands spread out on his knees and his old bald head a-shinin' and his rope yarn mustache a-spreadin' all over his face. The whole dern pose looks a heap like Sam was getting ready to bark at somebody and Dad is trying to quiet him. I remarks something like this to Sam, but he don't take it kindly, him being sort of jealous of his looks. Monday morning, our imported ghostmaster drifts in on the overland with his family. He's a tall, rangy, sickly-looking guy, dressed all in black and looking a heap like an undertaker or a doctor. Maybe that's because their jobs are something alike, only different. One hasn't 'em off, as I may say, and the other enticing 'em back. His wife, I reckon she was, is a little fat dumpy female with a poker face and one of these smiles that don't go any higher up her features than her nose. They heads for the Oriental house with about a dozen of us trailing along behind with our fool mouths hanging open like we was watching for spirits of the departed to come flocking around and begin a ghost dance. Notices is flung round the town that afternoon for a seance, as they calls it, at the Woodman Hall that night. Admission 25 cents, which looks sort of sordid and commercial, as I may say, but we reckons that Ghostmasters has to eat and buy things the same as other folk. Me and Sam Kinney gets in the hall kind of late that night, most of the crowd having already arrived and the festivities just ready to begin. Our respected and successfully dodged maiden school teacher, Miss Arabella Dobbs, is playing kind of soft-like on the piano, extracting agony from my old favorite, The Ship That Never Returned, and the lights are turned down low. Me and Sam sidles round the wall so as not to attract attention and sort of eases ourselves into seats round to one side and near the front. Miss Arabella finally wrecks the ship and stops, and the spook sharp requests 3 or 4 of us to tie him up in what he calls the cabinet, which I always figures heretofore a cabinet with some kind of furniture. This time she turns out to be a little coop they has fenced off in one corner with some curtains. Well, me being interested to the extent of $100, I naturally trails along to see that a good job is did, which she sure was. We sets him down and ties his hands and feet to the chair and ties a handkerchief over his eyes. I sure satisfies myself that hombre don't do any gallivanting round playing ghost. Then we pulls the curtains round him and moseys back to our seats. Miss Arabella and some of the other females present starts a kind of hymn tune, singing and playing sort of slow and solemn like they do at funerals. She sure sounds some mournful and makes me remember all the mean things I ever did. You know what I mean. Like when it's bright moonlight and sort of frosty and you're a long way from home and tired and the coyotes are yapping way off in the mesa and you're broke and just getting over a big drunk and has lost your job. Oh shucks, it ain't like that either. It's more like when you wake up and hear a funny noise late at night and you just know it's a rattlesnake but you can't locate him and you're afraid to move. It's just expecting things to happen and ain't right sure what they're going to be when they do. I glances over at Sam, and he's settin' there grinning, but she sure ain't what you might call a pleased grin. It's too nervous-like, and I kind of feel that I'm doing the same.
I reckon it ain't more'n a minute or two, but it sure seems like an hour. We hear a tambourine glanging away, kinda soft-like, but getting louder all the time, and pretty soon here she comes sailing over the top of the curtains and falls on the floor with a bang. Honest, I could feel the hair riz up on my backbone. Then a bell starts ringing, and pretty soon it follers the tambourine over the curtains. I hear Uncle Jed Weatherby behind me chawing real fast on his tobacco, and I know that I ain't the only one feeling creepy. Uncle Jed usually chaws at a rate of 120 to the minute, unless he gets scared or mad, and then he begins to speed. I'm watching the cabinet pretty close, and right after the bell comes over, I begin to see a dim blue light up near the top of the curtains. Presently she gets brighter, and then I see a hand like it was all fire sort of waving slow over the top. I'm kinda wishing by now that me and Sam hadn't got so darn near the front. She sure would have been a heap more comfortable back near the door. After this flamin' hand sort of burns itself out, a dim light begins shining through the curtains, getting brighter and then going down again, and then it seems to come right through the curtains and begins to form itself into a human figure on our side. Uncle Jed is sure exceeding the speed limit with that cut of his by now. I can feel his chin whiskers tickling the back of my neck every time he chaws, him looking over the top of my head. The figure keeps on getting plainer and plainer till we can see it's some kind of Injun from a tribe I don't know. It ain't no Navajo, nor Apache, nor Pima, nor Maricopa, nor Papago, nor none of the Injuns we're used to, but it's sure Injun for all that, and it starts walking toward us, talking some kind of outlandish stuff, which say maybe its native tongue for all I know. I feels a cold something like ice water running down the back of my wishbone, and I can't figure whether I'm getting cold sweats or Uncle Jed's tobacco is dribbling, and I ain't taking the trouble right then to find out. I reaches back and gets a good grip on my old .45. Not that she'd have been much use if this is a real ghost, but I figures that I'll sure feel a whole lot better if I can unlimber her if that darn Injun gets too close. But the Injun finally circles round and goes back to the curtains and disappears, and I hears plenty more besides me kind of sigh real heartfelt and deep. The lights are turned up bright after a minute, and 2 or 3 of us goes and has a look at the spook foreman. He's settin' there all tied up tight as ever, looking kind of sick and pasty-like, which I don't wonder at none, seeing as how I'd probably be looking the same way if I was in his place. Of course, I still ain't convinced that I'm going to lose my bet, but I sure would have admired to call this thing off right here and now. But she ain't over yet, and after another hymn tune or two, they turns the lamps down again, and we're off once more. Well, she starts pretty much the same as before, with bells ringing and somebody playing on a mandolin and such like, and this creepy feeling coming back stronger than ever. And presently that blue light begins shining again, and another spook begins developing right before our eyes. Uncle Jed starts speeding up on his cut as before, and pretty soon we see the new phantom walking toward us. Before it gets plain enough to see very good, we hears the voice of the boss of the works saying from the cabinet, "The spirit of Nathaniel Barker desires to communicate with someone present." Right here is where I gets a good grip on my chair and prepares to lose 100 pesos. I hear a little shuffle down the room like people uncrossing their legs and kind of straightening up, and Uncle Jed's speed goes up another notch. Everybody has got their eyes fixed on that spook and wishing his chair had rollers under it so he could push it back without drawing attention to himself. In a moment the light or the ghost or something gets strong enough to see plain, and derned if I know whether I'm disappointed or not. One thing is sure, she ain't Dad Barker. The figure I sees is short and kind of bow-legged and is bald on top and is inclined to be fat all in one place. You know how I mean, kettle-bellied. There's a kind of gasp and a gulp behind me, and I figures Uncle Jed has finally swallowed his cud, and I sits there with my eyes popping way out and hears a sort of gasp go down the room, and then Sam Kinney jumps right up and yells out, "Hell, it's me! The darn digit's gone and materialized me!" And I'll be derned if he ain't right. It sure was old Sam Kinney to the life. Even the clothes look like Sam's Sunday suit, which he's had for about 10 years. It's like Sam was looking in the glass at himself. While I was getting my senses back and trying to digest all this, Sam clambers over my legs and out on the floor where his ghost was, hauling his 6-gun out as he comes. "I'm a ghost, am I?" he yells. "You derned old fraud! I'm a spook and a phantom and don't know when I'm dead, huh? Whoopee!" And bang goes his old gun. Sam's ghost hops about 2 feet straight up in the air and yells, "Wow!" "Give me room," yells Sam. "Right here's where I lays my own ghost." And bang goes the old 45 again. The ghost starts to run, but Sam gets in between it and the cabinet and heads it off. All this time a commotion is going on in the cabinet, and at Sam's second shot, down comes the curtains and out rolls the ghost herder, still tied up and tangled in the curtains and chair. Somebody turns a couple of the lamps up, and everybody is up on their hind legs, some trying to get closer to see what's going on, and some more trying to get out. But Sam keeps dancing round his ghost, shooting holes in the floor every so often, and yelling like a drunken Patchy. "Vanish, dern ye," he hollers. "Go off in blue flame and sulfur. Whoop!" The ghost is hopping round and yelling every time Sam shoots, and I notices that while it sure looks like Sam, its voice ain't a bit like his'n. Sam's voice being a crackled bass and the spook's a high treble. The ghost tries to dodge, and it and Sam go hopping back and forth, facing each other like one of these newfangled dances. Finally, the spirit ducks, and Sam makes a grab and gets it by the arm. Then the ghost gets a grip on Sam's ear, and they starts another fancy 2-step round and round. In the mix-up, the ghost's bald head comes off. Huh? That's right. I mean, the bald part comes off, only there's plenty of hair underneath, and also the mustache comes away in sections, and then we begins to see a great light, at least those of us who saw them arrive at the depot, because this ghost of Sam is the hard-featured female which I surmises is the professor's wife. But the way that fat she-wildcat is clawing Sam's face and neck and trying to bite him in vulnerable spots is plumb scandalous. Sam has dropped his gun when they begins to dance, and when he sees what it is has got him, he begins to holler for somebody to take it off, which it takes about 6 of us to do, and we all gets more or less scratched up in the operation. We finally quiets her and Sam down, and then we resurrects the professor from where he's hard at work kicking the chair and curtains to pieces. He wants to fight when we first unties him, but we simmers him down, and finally they fesses up. They blames Bob a whole lot for giving 'em a wrong steer and not explaining more fully which hombre in the picture they was to materialize. We feel some sore at 'em, of course, on account of the fake, but as I wins my bet, I'm willing to be easy, so we kindly but firmly suggest that they leave town sudden-like and lets it go at that. Bob Hawkins actually has the nerve to kick on the doc turning the money over to me, claiming that the ghost of the Injun's genuine anyway, but that don't get him nowhere with the doc, who forks over pronto. In fact, the crowd rides Bob so hard that he threatens to shoot the next guy who mentions the name of Dad Barker, and Sam Kinney gets hot every time he hears an Injun ghost dance, taking it as a personal reflection. Which brings me back to what I says before. There may be ghosts, and then again, maybe there ain't, but whichever way she is, I sure don't believe in 'em. End of Dad Barker's Ghost.